Welcome everybody to May's podcast. Spring has well and truly sprung. The leaves are on the trees, and this month we are going to take a deep dive into one of our most special reserves. That's the Smardale National Nature Reserve. First of all, we're going to meet with Andrew Walter, who's the reserves officer in charge of Smardale, and then we're going to have a chat to Sylvia Woodhead, who is into all things earth science, and she's going to give us a bit of insight into the geology and the geomorphology that's shaped the reserve and has made it as special as it is. Andrew Walter, better known as Wall, you're the Trust's longest serving employee, is that?
Yeah, I don't know if that's an accolade or something to be slightly worried about as the years march on, you know.
Well, first of all, how long have you been at the Trust and how long have you been involved with Smardale?
Well, we're currently stood at the spot, just above the Hillary Overy plantation, where I first started at Smardale. That was with the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. So we had a working holiday, I think it was working holiday we had here. And we were clearing out all of the spruce trees that were in the plantation. And so we were trying to clear it for the native broadleaf. And well, as you can see now, it's regenerated, which is fantastic. So that was in 1993. And then about 8 months later, I think, I started with the Trust in 1994.
And were you involved in Smardale from the off with the Trust?
Yeah, from the off, I was at Smardale. So then I carried on this work for probably about the next 10 or maybe even 15 years to try and remove some of the spruce out of the woods, which was, you know, was dropping needles. It was acidifying the ground. Basically,
you've been involved with the reserve for over 30 years. 33 years, is my calculation right?
If you say so.
It is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic.
Worrying, as I say.
Tell us exactly where we are on the...
So the Hillary Overy plantation was named as such because it was a gift to the Trust to expand Smardale when we first were acquiring lumps of land. So if you come in at the entranceway, we just moved through the reserve just beyond the viaduct. That is the viaduct, which is currently still operational as a railway line as a part of the Settle to Carlisle. So we're about 100 yards from that viaduct and heading upstream.
So how did we go on? Give us a bit of a potted history about how the Trust acquired Smardale, because we, like you said, it came in chunks, didn't it?
Yeah, in the 70s, 78, we acquired the first bit of Smardale, which was basically the woodland areas. It wasn't the railway line; it was the woodland below. That was acquired from the Darg family, and then in the 90s, by 1990, I think we'd already done a deal with the railway company that we could use the railway line, but we acquired it in 1990 and we bought that for a grand total of £1, and with all the liability attached to that, which is more important. And at that time, Northern Viaduct Trust was formed because they were saving Smardale Gill Viaduct, which is the disused one. And they acquired the liability of that to stop that from falling or being demolished.
Well, the whole reserve is based around this railway line going underneath the Carlisle Settle as well. But I mean, that kind of makes it an incredible feature in itself, isn't it? Because it's this linear, level feature that goes through all this wonderful scenery and habitat.
Yeah, so it's currently 5 miles from one end to the other, so we've got a lot of boundaries there. You've got a whole range of habitats from woodland through to grassland and the river, and on top of that you've got open views to the fells, and you've got all the archaeology around, which, you know, dates back to it dates all the way back, but, you know, the stuff you can see is kind of Romano-British, but then, you know, through medieval period. So it's, yeah, quite a phenomenal place, and somewhere we can make accessible to just about everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always going to have challenges. You know, the wet weather always erodes bits of the surface, and in the winter it gets a bit kind of spongy. So there'll be some days when it's not accessible for everyone, but in the main, in the dry period, it is.
I think that's an incredible bit of work that you've been doing over the years, to make more and more of the line I mean, because it's all level, but to get that surface right so that it is accessible for all users, you know, so that people with prams, people with wheelchairs can get down here. And like you say, because it is so utterly special as a nature reserve in terms of its habitats and species.
Yeah, I remember actually when I first started at Smardale, Kerry, my boss then, said, oh yes, we should be looking to make this more accessible. And that was literally taking out step stiles and gateways, because we had quite a lot of gateways which are not really all that necessary. So that's when it started. It's only taken 30 years to get it nearly access for all.
and recently we were able to buy another piece of the same railway line, weren't we? And therefore extend the access. So now we're looking at, what, 5 miles of access for all path?
So yeah, with the National Park, who have been doing a lot of work on our latest acquisition at Smardale, which is, well, I refer to it as the Wakeby Link, because it links Smardale to Wakeby. And so they've come in and, with some volunteers, surfaced the track to make it the same sort of grade as the rest of Smardale now, which is great. But there's 2 bridges that unfortunately were taken down. And so they're currently working on getting the planning permission through to put those bridges back. So hopefully by the end of this year, it'll be a straight, level, easy access path.
Plans are in place. So we just need the 2 bridges in, and that gets you all the way from Newbiggin on Loon all the way to our reserve at Wakeby Green Rigs.
Yes.
Yeah.
It gets to the Wakeby Road Bridge, and then at that point, you have to sort of leave the reserve onto the road in order to access Kirby Stephen, but you can certainly do that. You can't get through the end of Wakeby, and we don't have any plans to upgrade the access through Wakeby, because the flora there is so incredible that you couldn't do it without destroying something. So we have to be quite guarded about Wakeby.
Now we're going to have a walk along. We can talk about each of the different habitats as we go, but we're stood in, like you said, in woodland that you started to manage even before you were working for the Trust. Tell us a little bit about the woodland at Smardale and the kinds of things you've been doing over the past 30 years to make it great for wildlife.
Initially, we were taking out some of the plantation trees, so there's conifers, and we took out a lot of spruce, Norway and Sitka, and larch. And you can see remnants of them still. There's the odd tree, but it's regenerated up through with native broadleaf woodland, ash dominated, which unfortunately has had a lot of ash dieback issues, so a lot of that's died back, but not all trees. We still have living ones, so the plan for them is not to fell the living ones, because obviously they could repopulate with ash dieback resistant seedlings. So hopefully that is happening even as we speak. You've got a good dense understory of hazel, and you've got all the normal woodland species, hawthorn, hazel, ash. And oak has probably been planted, lots of birch.
And you routinely coppice parts of it, don't you?
Not the ancient woodlands. What we do coppice is the trackside. So when we first started here, we coppiced all the way to where the boundaries was, like the boundary of the railway line, the walls on either side, and that kind of varies in distance, And it was really a good thing to do. It got a good flush of species coming through, and it sort of grades from the Smardale end as you head towards the Smardale Gill Viaduct. It grades from woodland or secondary woodland and then into ancient woodland, and then that woodland management and that coppice rotation, and then as you get to halfway to the Smardale Gill Viaduct, we sort of enter into a scrub rotation, because at that point we get some interesting butterfly species, some orchids. So we got the Scotch Argus start and the Northern Brown Argus start at that point.
So let's have a wander down there then and have a look at where you've been doing that.
Yeah.
So we've just kind of come out of the edge of the woodland, haven't we? And then we've got this beautiful cleared grassy bank. This is the kind of habitat the Scotch Argus likes, is it?
Well, yeah, as you say, Simon, we've just come into where we start to do scrub management to keep the banks open And at this point, we start to see the Scotch Argus butterfly, and we start to see the northern brown Argus butterfly. And I think the key thing is that here is where we start to get Sylvia, which is the food plant for the Scotch Argus.
So Sylvia is blue moorgrass.
Blue moorgrass, yeah.
A very specialist limestone species,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And we also get the common rock rose occurring on these banks, and that's the food plant for the northern brown Argus.
Caterpillars of.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think we need to explain, don't we, that this is one of only 2 sites in England where the Scotch Argus occurs.
Where it has always occurred and naturally occurs, yes.
Yeah.
There are now other sites where it's been reintroduced.
Oh.
Some have just kind of appeared. And there was a genetic study, in fact, a couple of years back, and they discovered that these butterflies and these reintroduced sites, whether they were unofficial, anyway, the butterflies came from here. At Smardale is kind of like one of the most southern populations in England, and then it carries on through Scotland, but the Scottish populations aren't quite as genetically diverse. So this is a really, particularly interesting and important species to have here.
And a really healthy population, unlike the other English site where it's always been, which is Arnside Knot, isn't it, where they don't seem to be doing quite as well.
There's always the struggle with getting the balance of grassland grazing right, and the scrub basically don't want to graze it too hard. The butterflies need some form of, in fact, they need to get away from the heat. Yeah, so they want the scrub offers them shade if it's really hot, as does the more dense tussocks, and so they're quite tricksy, really.
Where we're stood, we've got this great big steep bank that's been cleared of scrub, and it's full of flowers. It's got the Sylvia. It'll have the rock rose in. You said it's where the Scotch Argus starts to be seen. But wow, that's extreme management, keeping that free of scrub.
Yeah, well, here it is. It's a very, very steep bank, but it's right next to the track, so we can access this. But not all parts of Smardale are like that, and that's a real challenge. And I mean, I just wanted to say that with this bank, not only do we have the common rock rose and the Sylvia, but this is also where we start to get the first major flushes of orchid. We get on here. There was a big flush of fly orchid here, but they've kind of dwindled right back. But we've got fragrance, common spotted, and greater butterfly, broadleafed helleborine all start at this point as we walk up the railway line. So, it's a whole change in habitat scene,
Yeah. How do you think the management has changed in the 30 years? Has the management changed over that time? Or are we still basically trying to do the same things?
We're basically trying to do similar things.
Yeah.
So in the main, on the bits that we can access, the bits that we can physically manage, it hasn't changed a great deal. It's the more extensive areas where we can't really get to. That's the bit that's changing and is becoming more scrubby. In terms of challenges, yes, there's challenges with grazing and getting the balance right, and with global changes, deposition of atmospheric nitrogen. That's quite significant. It makes everything want to be a bit more grassy. The fact that we haven't got such hard frosts means that the brackens can spread more, and also both of those things encourage more scrub. So we've got to really think about how we consolidate our efforts and maintain what we can.
And you're looking at some innovative ideas at the moment, aren't you? Exploring some innovative ideas to try to tackle some of that scrub in those really steep, inaccessible areas.
Yeah, it's very embryonic.
Yeah.
But we're looking into whether we can get goats onto an area, more extensive area of Smardale. It'll be goat heaven.
But
so
they would tackle the scrub, is the thing, wouldn't they?
Well, you can try it and see if they do. They're browsers, so they'll eat woody stuff. They'll literally eat the twigs, then they'll nip off. They love bramble regrowth, and my lot, they love hazel leaves, and so they make a beeline for that. And also, they really like tussocky grasses. So, like, sheep will go in and they'll eat kind of
between the tussocks.
Yeah, the shorter. Yeah, they like kind of regrowth. Whereas the goats, well, they eat all sorts, but what the key thing is they do not target flowers, they'll target scrub.
Yeah.
So hopefully we
Ideal.
can keep the flowers,
Yeah.
get rid of some scrub, and they'll manage the tussocks a bit, and then that would be perfect, potentially. But like I say, a large block is goat heaven. You think most goats are kept in little, relatively boring fields, and they're always escaping because what's outside of them is better. Whereas here, why would you go anywhere? Because it's heaven here. So like they shouldn't want to escape, but if they've got it in their minds, the wall is not a boundary for a goat, is it?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Right, let's have a walk a little further down into some of the grassland areas, and we'll talk about some of because Smardale is absolutely chocked full of brilliant flowers, isn't it? We'll walk down a bit and stop and have a chat about the grasslands a bit further down there. Right, well, here we are by the massive lime kilns, a huge feature of Smardale Gill, and we're stood next to this great big face of Carboniferous limestone. And really, well, it's the limestone that has made this magnificent landscape, isn't it?
yeah, yes, for sure. I mean, well, the rock itself is full of fossils, and it's obviously very base rich. So yes, looking at the landscape, we can see this 300 million year old rock here, but if you look across to the other side of the valley, you can see where there's a fault line that runs through, and then it turns into the sandstone of the quarries as you're going towards New Biggin there, and it was that sandstone that actually built the viaduct that we can just see around the corner there, made from sandstone, not limestone.
Yes,
this limestone was mostly for burning into quicklime to be used in iron smelting. So the whole railway line was about taking the coal to Barrow and the iron back, and then the limestone on the way.
I suppose what I was getting at was it produces the landscape. That's why the gill's here. That's why we've got this steep-sided valley. It dictates the vegetation and the wildlife, even what's in the river. And then it's the reason why we have this incredible industrial archaeology, why we've got the lime kilns and the railway line running right in front of them. So you've got the way of bringing the coal in, taking the quicklime out. You've got the limestone here to feed into your lime kilns, and then that magnificent viaduct which just sets the whole landscape off. Tell us a little bit about Scandal Beck then, because I think it's one of the features that's so special about Smardale, but there isn't great access to it, and it's kind of one of the features that it doesn't get talked about as much as the beautiful grassland and the beautiful woodland and the birds. And
yeah, so Scandal Beck was the first river to be designated SSSI and SAC. So it's a big gorge. When you look at Smardale from the air, or get an oblique view of it, it's a massive deep gorge.
yeah.
And so the river that goes through it, has lots of really great things associated with it. It's got the white-clawed crayfish, bullheads.
But the limestone is very important, is it not, for the white-clawed crayfish? They need lime-rich waters to make their carapaces. Now, the other thing about this area around the lime kilns and this end of the reserve specifically, we're surrounded by fantastic limestone grassland here, aren't we? Our old director, Peter Bullard, he was ridiculously keen on Smardale because he said it was the reserve with the biggest number of plant species. It had the longest list of all our nature reserves, which is pretty good going because we've got some pretty special nature reserves. So tell us a little bit about the kind of real specialities that you find in this grassland at Smardale.
Yeah, so where do you even begin? But I mean, where you've got these thinner limestone soils, it's kind of where we're looking right now. Is you've got quite a variety of orchids. If you include Waitby, we've got 13 species of orchid that have been recorded on here. And then you get swathes of bird's eye primrose, that really beautiful little pink primula, in the kind of more flushed areas. The blue moorgrass itself is a scarce plant on the atlas, but obviously where it grows it can be dominant, and actually it can be a problem. On Wakeby at the far end there, we've got, in a similar way, we've got sawwort, which is an uncommon plant, but you get delighted when you see it in a grassland. But at Wakeby, it's dominant in places. So at Wakeby again, we've got globe flower here. We've got, well, we're looking at currently with lots of primrose and cowslips, but later in the season, you go through bloody cranespill. Got some alpine bistorte in the field just below over there.
Yeah, and then what did we just go and see?
Birds
foot sedge, yeah.
I mean, one of the nicest, blue moorgrass at this time of year is amazing because of the sheen of the flowers. But the other one here is quaking grass, isn't it? You get quite a lot of quaking grass. It's a really nice little grass.
So, the other thing that's really special about Smardale is the amount of bird species. In fact, let's walk back down the track a bit. We'll find a bit where the bird song is really good, and we'll have a chat about the birds down there.
Yeah.
So I hope our listeners can hear all the bird song going on, because the other thing Smardale is absolutely great for is its bird life. Its woodland birds are fantastic. Its scrubland birds are fantastic. What else have we got, Walt?
Well, from the beck we have dipper in the beck, obviously flying up and down there. Just below us, I think, is the haunt of pied flycatcher. So that's really nice. There's willow warbler just going on there.
Yeah.
We've had the blackcap wood pigeon over there. There was a rookery just above us. We saw it coming in, but I don't know if it's moved. But
so we had rookery down there, didn't we? We had jackdaws nesting in the back of the quarry.
We have a raven on the viaduct.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it usually nests underneath one of the arches. Very early nesting bird.
And then once you get out into those open areas, we had it was a swallow just flying past, and we had skylark singing as well, didn't we? So there's a real mix of bird species. Obviously, the best time of the year, right now, if anybody wants to get out early and have a walk down Smardale, because it is, for the dawn chorus, it is one of those very special places.
Deafening right now at sort of 5:30 in the morning.
Well, thanks, Wal. That's been absolutely great. What a wonderful morning to be at Smardale.
It's a gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous place any time of year, really. I mean, obviously it's cold in the winter, but I mean it's bleak and the landscape's always still there. And obviously now it's full of spring promise, and in the summer you've got all the flowers. So, and in the autumn you've got the Scotch Argus butterfly. Every time of year is brilliant to visit here. Come visit.
Bro, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Right, well, we've come back to the car park now. We've left Wal out on the reserve, and we've come here to meet Sylvia Woodhead. Now, Sylvia's been involved with the trust for a long, long time. Sylvia and her husband Peter. Peter was chair of conservation group and has been a trustee for a long time. And Sylvia is the keenest earth scientist I know, and spends her life pushing the idea that the rocks dictate everything else around. And what I wanted to explore here with Sylvia was how the underlying geology and the geomorphological processes that have shaped the landscape have dictated what Smardale has become today.
Oh, brilliant. Hello, I'm Sylvia Woodhead. I am a member of Cumbria Geoconservation, which is a special interest group of Cumbria Wildlife Trust. And my mission, as Joe has said, is to make the geology of Cumbria better known.
And we're going to take a walk. We're going to walk the other way down the track on the newly laid path towards Wakeby. We can have a discussion on the way about all things geology, but we're going to go to a special cutting that came with this new acquisition to the reserve.
Yes.
Excellent. Let's take a walk.
Great.
We're going down the Wakeby link now on this wonderful new path for all, and we've come across our first outcrop. So tell us a little bit about what we're seeing in this cutting.
Right. What we're seeing is a sedimentary rock. It's exceptionally old, probably about 350 million years, something we can't really imagine. It's light grey and it's laid down in layers. And it was formed in, we think, a shallow sea when the continents and oceans were very, very different from now. So it would have been tropical, south of the equator, full of fossils, and we might find some.
Yeah, I was going to say, and this rock is in the main, this is the Carboniferous limestone, and this is in the main what underlies the whole of the Smardale Reserve.
That's exactly right, yes. These are lower Carboniferous rocks and they have a special name. They're actually called, this one's called the Ashfell limestone.
Within the limestone there are beds of sandstone, which Wal was talking about earlier, from which the actual Smardale Gill Viaduct was made.
Yes, the sandstone formed before the seas were completely clear, so there were rivers and deltas which brought in this sand, and it's grains of sand stuck together with silica. It's incredibly hard, a brilliant building material, great for weight bearing, and so that's why they used it for the viaduct.
What I really want to explore here is how the geology and the geomorphology dictates everything else. And you were saying that as you walk towards Smardale Gill Viaduct, when we pass through areas of the sandstone, the vegetation changes.
Absolutely, because it's made of quartz, totally of quartz, so there's almost no minerals. The soil will be sandy. One of the really interesting things is, as a sandstone, it doesn't let water through, and most sandstones are porous, and it isn't. So it often gets waterlogged, and in the winter you can see springs coming up. So before you did this lovely path, that bit of the railway line, or the trail, got wet.
Early on in my ecological career, I was fascinated with woodlands and how you classify woodlands, because woodlands can be so altered. They can have all the tree species taken away and a whole new load of tree species put in. So you can't really tell what type of a woodland it is by the tree species, but you can always tell by the ground flora, because that doesn't change, and that's what's dictated by the limestone and by the underlying geology. So even if all the tree species have been changed, you can still tell where it changes from dog's mercury to bluebells.
I think you've gone very ecological here.
Yeah, all right. Let's wonder. So here we are in another cutting. We've got thick beds of limestone. Tell us a little bit about how the limestone is laid down and what are we looking at today?
Right, we're looking at a process that took millions and millions of years, and sediment formed on the seabed, and we assume it formed horizontally, and we divide it into beds or layers, and sometimes there was a long period when nothing was deposited, and you get a bedding plane, which is a layer that you can clearly see in the rock where the rock type changes. Yeah. And here in this cutting, we can see these bedding planes. And as the rock turned from a soft sediment into a solid rock, it formed these cracks, and we call them joints. And you can see a couple of vertical joints here, which are used by the roots of ash trees.
Yeah.
And this rock is tilted, it's been moved by earth movements, and it's dipping in the direction that we're going. So as we're walking along younger and younger rocks.
Brilliant.
What a piece of work this was.
Yeah, isn't it?
That does look good. Taffy.
So, Sylvia, you were talking about the joints that we see cutting through the rock, and they're perpendicular to the bedding planes, and here we're a cutting where some of the joints have been widened. Now, tell me if I'm right. The water finds these points of least resistance, and that solution and that weathering from the water is basically what produces on a much larger scale, the whole landscape of the Smardale Gorge. Is that right?
Wow. To some extent, yes. What we're seeing here are joints that have been widened, just as Joe has said, by rainwater going down the joints and dissolving away the limestone. On a larger scale, it would form caves. It might erode away deep valleys. And it's a sort of hint to what we're going to see as we go a little bit further along.
But the Smardale Gorge itself, I'm not saying that it was a joint. It might have been an old fault line within the rock, but it is a line of least resistance, a line of weakness that has been exploited by the water. Don't we think that that is as the glaciers melted when there was a lot of water coming down?
You are absolutely right in saying that rivers have picked out weaknesses, and it's thought that despite what I was saying about the Ashfell sandstone, that was the weak band of rock that the glaciers and the rivers followed.
Yeah. And therefore eroded that fantastic gorge that brilliant viaduct sits across now. Yeah, so Sylvia, we left the limestone 100 yards further back down there. We've come into this new cutting, and it's a completely different rock. What are we looking at here?
Well, it's a really good question because, as you say, it is completely different because we've got huge blocks of limestone. Some of them are rounded, but most are not, and they're stuck together with red sand. And we believe that this is the local rock called the Brockram, and it's 100 million years younger than the limestones that we were seeing just up there, which is almost incredible, isn't it?
Okay, so let me get my head around this. We've had the Carboniferous period. We've had all these rocks laid down in shallow seas, and then on top of that we would have had the coal measures,
Millstone grit in between,
and the millstone grit. So that appears now to be missing, and this much, like you say, 100 million year younger rock has then been deposited on top. Like you say, it's full of blocks. How does a crazy rock like this form?
Oh, well, in crazy conditions, in a desert, and in a desert where there are flash floods, and the flash floods come down the occasional valleys, the waddies, and then it all dries up, and then it gets cemented and baked hard.
So, I mean, this must have been some incredible event then, or events, because it's huge. So, I mean, that must have been the most incredibly destructive event to bring all this material down.
Happens in deserts all the time. I think if you go to Jordan, although unfortunately I've never been, you might be unlucky enough to be there when there's a major flood event, and the water all dries up, and you're left with this rock.
We look at the processes that happen now that form similar things. We extrapolate that back 250 million years to a desert environment, and we say that looks just like what we've got here, except this has then obviously had millions and millions of years to form into a massively hard, solid piece of rock.
The so-called father of geology, James Hutton, came up with that phrase or saying, which is that the present is the key to the past. I think it's the only cutting we know with the rock like this. It's just amazing. It's absolutely wonderful to see the state of this site. It's a local geological site, and it's now so much more accessible because those unfortunate geologists who now have to use a wheelchair can come along here and they can see this rock, and there are enough bits, I think, to pick up the odd bit, and you may get a fossil. So it's a really wonderful thing that the Wildlife Trust has done in making this all accessible path here.
Talking of fossils, Sylvia, the limestone that we've been walking through before is formed within these warm, shallow tropical seas, and at different periods there are lots of wildlife in there, isn't there? And again, using that same principle as the present is the key to the past, we can look at the fossils within the rock and extrapolate back to what conditions might have been like in those shallow seas. So Peter's very kindly been lugging this great big piece of rock about with these wonderful fossils in it. Tell us a little bit about what we've got in this one fragment of Carboniferous limestone that's come off the edge of this cutting.
What a jumble. There is a huge brachiopod here. That was a shellfish, that a filter feeder that would actually have been the other way up in life, and currents in the sea, waves and tides, would have brought in its food. I can see a cross-section of a crinoid there, wrongly called a sea lily. That's another filter feeder. I think there's another brachiopod
but
there.
a similar kind of thing,
Yeah.
like sticking up on a stalk from the seabed.
What we haven't actually got in this particular specimen is any coral, but these would have been the organisms that were found in a coral reef.
You don't need to name the species.
No, these species may well be extinct. The corals in these coral reefs are not the corals that we have today.
Yeah.
They were all wiped out in one of the major extinctions.
Right.
I think we should walk to the end of the cutting.
So Sylvia, we've come to the end of the cutting here, and the rocks have changed again, and now it's red and it's very fine grain. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Well, we're still in the Brockram, but it was deposited in a desert environment, and in between some of these storms, there would be sand dunes blowing over the deposits that had rained down in the storm. But the storm's quickly over, and it's a desert. Now, this sandstone is red. It's bright red because it's coated with iron oxide, which shows it was formed in a desert environment. And look how tiny the grains are. Now, if this was dry, it would blow about in the wind. So it's a wind-blown sand. And when you get your hand lens out and have a look, you'll find every grain is completely rounded, and they've got this sort of desert varnish on, because when they blew around, they hit each other as they were blowing in the sand. And that's all to see in this cutting. Isn't it brilliant?
Fantastic. Right, well, that concludes the podcast for May. What a brilliant nature reserve. Well worth a visit, especially this time of the year, going into the summer when all the flowers are out. But any time of the year you can see the geology and see the landforms that make this fantastic place. I'd just like to wrap up there then and say a massive thanks to Sylvia and Peter for coming out today, talking about the geology. Massive thanks for Wal and his wealth of experience and time that he spent on this reserve, and as always, loads of thanks to Liz for putting all this together and making it happen, and hopefully we'll speak to you next month.